Welcome to the Comix sessions. This is where we do interviews with everybody and especially very, very talented people, such as our guest today. Today we have Luis is going to be a host, Mosby is going to be a host, Ash, I'm going to be a host, and today our special guest is David Quiroz Jr. His comic book is Night of the Chihuahuas, which is a very, very good surprise when you read it. Let's go. So thank you so much for being a part of our show. As Luis pointed out, we're really laid back. Not so laid back but we're pretty laid back. So again, thank you. Really great comic book. Thank you so much. Some people will give us like the comic book one, and then everything leaving off on a cliffhanger. Fucking awesome, because it made me want to go to the next comic book. And let's go with our first question. Again, thank you so much for being a part of the show.
Okay, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. To someone that has never heard of Night of the Chihuahuas, how would you describe it?
Oh man, Night of the Chihuahuas, it's a campy horror comedy. It's all about a pack of killer Chihuahuas in southern Arizona that are attacking a small town. They have the strength to back up their vicious attitude, and it's up to a police officer to figure out what happened. But unfortunately for everybody, his greatest fear just happens to be Chihuahuas. So sets up a very comedic, tongue-in-cheek look at these little dogs and what they could do if they got a hold of a serum that let them, give them the strength to back up their vicious attitude. And it's a love letter to the breed. I mean, I've rescued Chihuahuas, and I always just thought to myself, like, man, if you guys could do all the things you think you could do, you would be illegal to own. And it went from there. I was just like, we're having a good time with it. It's a very lighthearted, and I don't want to say lighthearted because there is, people get ripped apart and there's blood and all the monster movies that I grew up watching. This is just my love letter to them. But instead of like crazy, dudes in rubber suits or, big old monsters, it's Chihuahuas. So what else could you want?
It was really good because the way that people went out is kind of like a horror film when like they're yelling at the person and part is so intense and then whoosh.
Yeah. that was all by plan.
Perfect. Oh, it's so interesting that you introduced the subject matter as something of like a comedic horror. When you first started writing it, was that where you thought it would end up? Is that what you were going for?
Yes, very much so. Very much. So I mean, I'm a horror fanatic, right? Like all my favorite comic books, all my favorite TV shows, movies, it's all horror. And I love the horror genre, but I like to have fun with it. I'm of the age, I think, and so it's like I just nothing, I don't get scared by anything. I get scared by like my credit score and by, the world around me, but I don't get, a monster or something like that doesn't frighten me. So I would rather explore the other elements of horror. Like, it be so ludicrous that it's amusing, even if it is still dangerous? And, what does that tell us about ourselves as an audience and things like that?
Dude, so desensitized by modern things that you thought up the idea of giving Chihuahuas the ability to hurt people.
I mean, what's sad though is that it's such an escape, right? It's like I would rather live in this world where you could get ripped to pieces by a pack of Chihuahuas than the one that we currently inhabit. So,
And some of the panels were like, "What are you guys freaking out about? It's just a couple of Chihuahuas," and then, bam,
yep.
gone.
That's what she wrote.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting concept. You touched on it a little bit because I was as I was reading this. By the way, laughing out loud as I'm reading it in my break room, which is great. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, this guy is either terrified of these things when he was a kid, or the latter. It's a love letter to him. And I think you just mentioned it that you rescued them.
Yes.
And so it's clearly a big love of like, oh wow, if you guys were capable of doing half the stuff you guys think you are, like you guys would be great. How long have you been marinating this story before you decided to like put it on paper and be like, you know what, let me just start putting it out there? How long has it been cooking?
Longer than you would think. It's been a process, man. It's been a grind. And I would say I came up with this concept in like 2003, so about 20 years ago. And I just, it was inspired by a dog I had when I was in high school. So much even older than that, but like she was 17, blind, toothless, and she would still snap at people and chase people off the couch if she was sitting there and she wanted to be left alone. And like she was still terrifying, and she was so funny. She was like, 7 pounds, I think, because she was like just skin and bones by the end, but like never lost her how vicious she was. And she was my favorite dog still to this day that I've ever owned. And like, she was the one that inspired this. And I always thought to myself, like, because I would see like my friends, pretty big dudes that would come over and they'd be terrified of this little dog, and they'd be like huddled up against the wall because Coco was at the ground like with her teeth bared at them or what remaining teeth she had. And the image, the how incongruous it was for it to have like the big people terrified of a little dog always just struck me as hilarious. And then even funnier is somebody who came over and thought like, I'm not afraid of this thing, look, and then she'd bite them. They'd be like, oh my god, why did you let her bite me? And it was always funny to me. And then I just didn't, at first I wanted to make a movie about this, and I wrote the script, and we were into production and stuff, and like trying, and then we figured out we didn't have access to trained chihuahuas, and we didn't have enough chihuahuas to make this work. And so it was kind of like shelved for budgetary concerns. And then as I'm reading more comic books and I'm starting to write more medium, and I was like, this would make a cool comic book. Like we could do all the things we didn't have the budget to do on a film. And I met an artist, and the artist was like, I absolutely want to write, or I want to draw like panels of people getting ripped apart by chihuahuas. And I was like, perfect. We showed it to some investors and everybody loved it, and it's gone from there. But like it didn't happen as fast as I'm saying. It was like always like months and years, and then we ended up losing the artist because he got hired on to do projects that we couldn't compete with. We couldn't afford to pay him what he was going to make doing other things. And so it's like, independent art is just such a grind, and people move on, and like marriages happen, and kids, and jobs, and everything else. And so we've been continuing at it, and momentum has built to where we're now like crushing. Issue 5 is going to be out before the end of the year, which is insane for me to say that, and that's going to conclude the storyline. So yes, 20 years to get here, but we're here.
Wow, way to stay focused.
Thank you.
What would you say, was there anything, because you talked about you first wanting it to be a movie, was there a specific comic book or was there artwork that inspired this?
So at the time, I was really, really, really into the Night of the Living Dead comic adaptations that they were doing at, I think it was Fantico, which publishing house is no longer around. But this dude, Carlos Castro, his artwork was insane. And he did these like black and white, it was like painting, and it was multimedia because he would also like glue stuff on there. And that the image that he had of these, like the way the zombie swarm would happen, like that really inspired a lot of what I was trying to do. And you could see some of it comes through in the artwork that we have for the comic book. But when I was storyboarding out the movie and stuff, that's what really inspired me the most.
I like to the comic book was black and white, but the covers were amazing as well. You know what I mean? It was just good contrast of like it was like, I don't want to say oil painting. I want to say like it was like almost the word tangible. Like it was so vivid.
If you're talking about the so one of them that we did, the one that is currently our number one, we're on like our, God, I forget what printing it is, but every printing we've mixed up that we put in a new cover for it just to kind of differentiate which one we're on. But she did hers in charcoal. And so when she gave us the artwork, it was like if you move the paper, like the charcoal would start to shift. So we had to get it sealed. And her name is Anastasia Still Smoking, and her artwork is all done like that, like charcoal. And this was just a killer Chihuahua one that we did, that she did for us. It's amazing.
And just to throw out in, because I love that cover. The all I'm gonna say about it for you listening to this interview to go check it out. It's a lot of the covers are plays on different horror films, so the love letter to horror makes a lot of sense. It's very Shining-esque. Yep. And it made me giggle. I was like, what is this? Oh God, it's so great. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, we call that one the Chining.
Yeah.
Which is like my my nana, if she was trying to tell me to go watch The Shining, that's how she would say it. So it kind of makes me laugh anyway.
Cute. That's cute.
Mijo, I don't want you
Um,
watching that Shining. You'll be up all night, like that.
Okay, Nana.
Yeah, exactly.
aw.
And it was her dog. Her dog was Coco, who
Got it.
inspired all of this. So
When
Oh.
you're working from panel to panel, how do you think of the next, you know, how do you think of the next, how it should look? Like, do you think, like, if you were doing a movie, it clips to this scene or this angle, or how do you see it in your head?
that's a really good question. And this is something that I've been learning a lot. And I think my writing in general, just because I write across a few different mediums, my writing has become a lot better the more I've learned how to write for comic books. Because like when you're doing storyboards, you're thinking of that. You're thinking of the film and how it's going to go from shot to shot. But frame to frame is a little bit more of a linear, the journey that the reader's eye is going to take across the page. You're trying to toy with that a little bit depending on what's happening in the scene. So like if it's an information heavy scene, if I'm doing an expo dump, like a lot of expository dialogue, I'll try to, what's the most visually dynamic way for that to look on a page. But if I'm doing carnage, if I'm doing like a Chihuahua attack, I don't want to have like a little panel. I want to have a big, I want the reader to really, like just revel in that for an entire page if possible. If possible, I want them to be able to open it and look across. I know that digital comics are becoming more and more of a thing, but we are still very much writing this for like somebody holding a page in their hand, because as they flip it, I'm plotting out like, okay, your eyes, the reader, as soon as they open the page, your eye goes to the bottom right, because you can't help it. You kind of want to see where it is. So it's up to me as a writer. I'm trying to figure out how to make it the most interesting journey to get to what they just saw. And then that way they've ended on a piece of information that propels them to open it to the next page. It's like in writing, they always say, what's the point of a line? It's to make the reader want to read the next line. And every page is to make the reader want to read the next page. So I'm trying to manipulate that a little bit through the writing, while also remembering that comic books, just like movies, are a visual medium, and so you're trying to give the artist enough to sink their teeth into, no pun intended. But I've learned a lot from working with artists, where the artists have hit me up and they've been like, hey, you've got like 12 panels on this page, dude. This is not like, what am I supposed to draw? Like how is my drawing supposed to? And so learning how to give them room to flex their muscles and give the reader what they want, while still delivering some of the more story-based things that because of course I'm always like, all this dialogue is brilliant and needs to be on the page. It's like learning how to consolidate that, because these dialogue bubbles are clouding the frame, and all of a sudden this cool thing is no longer able to be seen as well as it should be, because all of this. And it's like, well, can we combine those two dialogue bubbles into one? I bet you we can, and I'll bet you that it pops a lot more because of that. So little things like that.
Wow. There's just so much to think about when you're in this process. You start with that energy like, ooh, I've got a story. I can't wait to put it on the paper. I can't wait to get the pictures that are in my head. And then you think about like the internet being the scary place that it is, and people's opinions being so rough. And are they going to get the story the way I want them to? So do you have any advice for any like up and coming creators or people who just haven't taken the plunge yet?
I would say, art is collaboration. It really is. And unless you're a novelist, who's like tucked away by themselves, and then they emerge from their hovel with a 300-page manuscript, even at that point, you're still going to give it to an editor. You're still going to, unless you're doing everything yourself, printing it, distributing it, doing all that stuff, in which case you could stop watching, because I don't, you could tell me advice. I don't have any advice for you, but for everybody else in this process, it's like, every step of the way is collaboration. And it's, you're collaborating with your representatives about the project you're going to work on. You're collaborating with the artists that are drawing what you're writing. You're collaborating with the publisher, who is, responsible for putting up the money for all this project. And they've got, all that. I just saw your cat in the background, Luis. I'm
I
sorry.
know. I'm so
Just like,
sorry.
that's awesome. That's so cool. And so it's like, learn to communicate and learn to take the advice of others. And everybody has something that they're really good at, and identifying what you bring to the table and standing up for your vision. Because I mean, you don't want to just do what everybody else tells you to. You want to understand what value you have as a storyteller, where your strengths are, but recognize that sometimes somebody's going to have something better, something that will elevate the story that you're telling, the comic book that you're creating. And it's like, artists are of course going to always want their art first and foremost. As a writer, you want your story to be presented in the way that you intend. So it's like the two of you, if you're on a good team, you mesh and you collaborate on the best possible output. So work with others. If you can't work with others, figure out a way to get better at that part, because so much of this comes from just the relationships that you build and the networks that you make, and helping each other out throughout the process. And then if you're unwilling to bend and unwilling to collaborate, then it's going to be really difficult, like very difficult.
You bring up a very valid point as far as the collaboration part, and it's something that I was thinking about, especially when it's something that you've been holding pretty close to the chest for the last 20 years, right? That it's like it started with this idea and then it turns into a vision, and then you're like, let me make it a screenplay, and then it's taken many forms. Now it's obvious that you have so much love for this project that you're working on. I have to know, what's that feeling? So I talked a little bit about the covers that I fell in love with, by the way. Albert Morales was one of the artists that I saw that did a certain kaiju that will remain unnamed. You have to see it. I'm not going to say what issue, but there were 3 issues that he did, and I know he was one of the main artists in the story, correct, of your books.
Correct.
So you have this vision. It's here. You write it. You create the characters. What's that feel like to see an artist then develop and design faces to these characters that you created and make a world and show it to you of like, is this what you saw? What was that feeling like of making that jump from your mind to the paper to actually seeing a representation of it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, incredibly satisfying. Incredibly, like every time the artist sends over a page, and of course we're doing all this digitally, so it's like they send it via email. When I get clicking the link is almost like unwrapping a present every time. And it's like, you open it up, and I've just like, sometimes I've like yelled out loud, like, oh my God, that's exactly how I imagined it. Or, oh my God, this is so much better than I imagined it. Very rarely, if ever, is it like, it's not quite what I had in mind. In those situations, usually, powwow together, and when you put your heads together, sometimes the artist will explain why they did it a certain way. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Okay, cool. Let's roll with that. And then if ever there's a time where I'm like, I really want it to be this way because of this reason, then we come to an understanding on that too. But the characters, I wrote them pretty specifically so that it's not like I could say, like, for instance, in the first issue, Leon, Leon is supposed to be very much an everyman. He's supposed to look like, a Latino action star. And so I want the reader to see this guy and say, hey, he's going to save the day. And then, of course, spoiler alert, he's kind of an idiot. And so when I wrote him, I wrote specific ideas about how he should look, while understanding that the artist is going to bring their strengths to this as well. The artist is going to bring an understanding of what I want, and then add add their skills to it, and what they bring to the table visually, and then once again, both of our visions combine, and we come up with something awesome. And Samantha was better than I anticipated, because I had her kind of written a little bit of a different way, but the attitude that the artist brought to her, it was like perfect. And she looks like her costume and her wardrobe is very specific to her character, not just because she's a police officer, but like the type of police officer she is and stuff. And it's like, not to get too spoilerish, but her being all in black and stuff is very very fitting. And once again, not exactly what I had in mind, but when I saw it, I was like, yep, that's better than what I had in mind. It's better than I envisioned. And it's just been so much fun. And then as characters get introduced and killed off throughout the series, it's like we've worked with a couple different artists throughout the series, and so they all have kind of been able to keep the same style that we have as a project, while each of them are bringing their own interpretations to it, and it's just been a lot of fun.
Does anybody we had a list of questions. Everybody good? Everybody's good?
Who's your favorite comic book character? Let me ask it again for the sound. Mm.
That's gonna
So,
stay in my.
David, when you decided to become a comic book person, no, when you decided to get into the world of comic books, did you have anything in particular that inspired you, or a certain hero that you were like, yeah, or like, I wish this guy got beat up like this?
Okay, so I grew up, I mean, what got me into comics as a kid was the Punisher. And unfortunately, that has a whole different connotation in modern era. But growing up, Jim Lee's Punisher was, his interaction with Kingpin, Daredevil, Spider-Man. It's like, I love that character because he was human, because he was flawed and he was vulnerable. I never clicked with superheroes. They just never did much for me. It was like, you guys are just too powerful. You guys are too flawless, and I always was more interested in the human characters. I got out of comic books for a few years, and I think it might have just been a little burnout when I was in high school and stuff. And then when I went to college, I had walked by a comic book shop on campus, and I was like, let me see what everybody's up to, all the characters I kind of left behind. And I walked in and I started talking to the guy behind the counter, and he was like, you know what you need to read, man? I got a comic for you. And he handed me Preacher. And
Ooh.
Preacher was like nothing I had ever seen or read before, and I ended up like going back to my dorm and handing it out like to everybody that would read it, and just got right back in. But like at that point now, I was more into like Vertigo and some of these different comic books, to where I was no longer as interested in like Marvel and DC. And that's not to take away from them or from anybody who's into them, but so the Punisher was my original one, Ghost Rider, and then Preacher, Garth Ennis's all I just became like and then Garth Ennis's Punisher was brilliant, because it's like that's such a ridiculous character when you boil him down to his core of like, I'm just going to shoot everybody I don't like. And then Garth Ennis seemed to really understand that like that's a bad guy. That's not a good guy. That's not a good character, And so but right now my favorite character in comic books is Erica Slaughter in Something's Killing the Children.
Oh, yes.
Oh.
Absolutely love that comic book. Like
Oh,
it's
amazing book. Amazing book. Yes, sir.
such a good comic book.
Nice. Ooh, I like that. That was good. That was great.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all for me.
Before I get into our outro, if you wanted to come back on to let us know about issue 5,
Heck yes. Let's plan on it.
you know how to get in touch with us, so you're more than welcome. So thank you very much for being on the show. Where can people find your work? We will also have links when you look up the interview. We will also have links there, but for people that are just not going to go into our descriptions, can you tell them how they can get your books?
Yeah. So our website is nightofthechihuahuas.com, all one word. Chihuahuas is a little tricky to spell. I apologize. We are in tons of comic book stores around the nation, but not like, we're in, when I say tons, for us, we're in a lot, man. We're in like 42 stores across, I think it's like 18 states. So that's huge for us, but it's also not, it's like a drop in the bucket of the available ones we have. We do, if you go to your local comic book store and they don't have it, you can have them order it through us, or you can just order from us directly. We're going to be in a couple of shows coming up. I'm going to be a guest at LA Comic Con, which I'm really excited about, in December. So if anybody wants to come say hey, I'd love to see you. And I am on Instagram, is where I'm most active right now. It's just the spelling of my name, David Quiroz Jr. And you can follow me there. I don't really post on Twitter anymore. I kind of left that health site behind. And then Night of the Chihuahuas is also very active on Instagram as well. I think they're on Facebook, but I'm not on Facebook. So
Gotcha.
Oh,
all right.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being a part of the show. This has been Comic Sessions. Thank you for watching.